Hey people, we find ourselves here again, and I'm back with another death story, but this time it is sourced from the strangest of places, a death tab book. Now, this tab book was produced by Guitar World, and there is only 500 copies that they ever made. Before I get to the story, I'd just like to talk about the contents of the tab book a little bit, so hopefully some of you guys go out there and pick it up, because as I say, there is only so many copies of this even available. Now, the tab book has 8 full transcriptions of death songs, and they are Pull the Plug, The Philosopher, Crystal Mountain, Flesh and the Power It Holds, Scavenger of Human Sorrow, Zombie Ritual, Spiritual Healing, and Together as One. Now, these tabs feature both guitar parts as well as the bass guitar, and it also shows you how the vocal patterns lie within the song. You could say, why buy this death tab book when you can just go on the internet and get countless amounts of free death tabs? And what I would say to you is like a couple of things. One thing would be that you can guarantee that the tabs inside this book are going to be pretty much spot on, given that it's coming from Guitar World, the biggest guitar magazine on the planet. And another reason to get this would also be the fact that it does actually have this, you know, real cool death story, and with some real nice images within it of Chuck. But most importantly, it's just about showing your support for the band and the music. Now, I'd just like to say thanks to a couple of people who have made this video possible in several senses. One sense, giving me the digital copies of the pages to once again present a high quality video, and also giving me the permission to share the content with you people out there. And the thanks go to Jeff Kitts, who is the managing editor of Guitar World, and also Eric Greif, who is Death's ex-manager, who I'm pretty sure coerced Jeff just a tiny bit to allow me to do all of this. So thank you. Lust for Life. He called his band Death, but Chuck Schuldiner loved life, family, and the most brutal metal imaginable. Guitar World celebrates death metal's pioneer and spiritual guide. Calling your band Death is either tongue-in-cheek insolence or a proclamation of utter sincerity, and Chuck Schuldiner was not given to flippancy where his music was concerned. Next to his family, music was most important to him, and this clarity drove him. To call his band Death was to equate his life's purpose with the most unimaginable end to which we all will go. It was predestined and non-negotiable. With Death, Chuck affirmed his life. That he found his way there at all seems prophetic. When Chuck began making music, death metal didn't exist as a genre, but as a virile yet negligible strain of heavy metal practiced most evidently by Britain's Venom. Low tunings, guttural vocals and extreme speed were the musical ingredients, topped off by the lyrical praises of the devil, hell and inglorious black deeds. Chuck came to this music with a goal: to bash out the most brutal riffs ever with the most brutal guitar sound ever, he told Guitar School. But almost immediately he set his sights higher. Though things were very crude back then, I still had a vision of becoming a very musical death metal band. The vision was everything. It pushed Chuck to form Death in 1984, and through Death he came to define at last the genre of metal infesting the underground. The release of the band's full-length debut, Scream Bloody Gore, in 1987 gave the scene a united front and furthered the awareness of death metal as a genre. Although the music standards had long been established, Chuck raised the bar with his technical and melodic riffing, while he upped the horror quotient with lyrics that drew colourfully from gore movies like Make Them Die Slowly and Reanimator. The scene grew, and as the audience for established acts broadened, a host of new bands emerged, each trying to outshock its predecessor. By the early 90s, the genre was overpopulated by speed riffing, Satan worshipping metalheads. Death metal has now become exclusively about being evil, satanic and playing full speed ahead, Chuck complained to UK's Metal Forces in 1991. It's not what I'm into at all. By then, Chuck had tackled topical subject matter that included abortion, altering the future, the struggles of the terminally ill, suicide machine, and the right to die, pull the plug. Committed to his vision, he gave shape to death metal, then took it to new heights. But it was not without costs. His demands of himself and his band frequently led to acrimonious partings with his musicians. Business dealings left him feeling overwhelmed and depressed. The biggest frustration with the music business for Chuck was the labels, says his mother Jane Schuldiner. He told me that if he could bypass the labels and just play for the fans, he would be a happy man. In the spirit of all pioneers, Chuck could be recklessly impulsive, as when he pulled out of a European tour just days before it was to begin. Humility tempered his character. He was always surprised when people would come up and say they were such a huge fan, says Richard Christie, Chuck's friend and drummer in Death and Control Denied, his post-death group. He was the most humble guy. I don't know if he ever realised how important he was to the metal scene, because he looked at himself as a fan of it. He was born Charles Schuldiner on May 13th, 1967 in Long Island, New York, the youngest of 3 children born to Malcolm and Jane Schuldiner. When Chuck was 1, his parents moved their brood to the budding suburb of Altamont Springs. His childhood was by all accounts happy and traditional, and his artistic streak displayed itself early. Jane said Chuck was interested in art and sculpture from a young age and loved both equally. Although his brother Frank was 7 years older than Chuck, the two were close companions. One day, while returning home from a visit to an out-of-state uncle, Frank was killed in a car accident. He was 16. His death was devastating for Chuck, and the sobering reality of the loss haunted him. He never really came to terms with it, says Jane. He always missed Frank. In the months after Frank's death, Malcolm and Jane began looking for a way to help Chuck deal with his grief. He had begun to take an interest in music, and the guitar had aroused his curiosity. We discussed it with him, and an acoustic guitar seemed the best, says Jane. Chuck signed up for classical guitar lessons, but the tedium of study quickly wore down his enthusiasm. I took 2 lessons, and the instructor showed me Mary Had a Little Lamb. Chuck recalled to Pit Magazine's Brooke Everett in 1999. I said screw it and went on my own. Chuck found the acoustic guitar lessons and his teacher boring, says Jane. He didn't like the repetitiveness of it all. While at a yard sale, Chuck spotted an electric guitar, a pointy knockoff in the spirit of BC Rich, whose guitars Chuck would later employ. Once it was in his hands, his old acoustic was completely forgotten. The first time he played the electric guitar, it was as if a switch was turned on in him, says Jane, and it never turned off. In the metal-intensive years of the early 80s, Chuck found no shortage of fresh inspiration. In addition to US bands like Van Halen, he was captivated by Scandinavian metal acts such as Hellhammer and Merciful Fate, and Britain's Venom, who would inform his growing death metal sensibilities. In 1983, the arrival of thrash acts like Metallica, Possessed and Slayer introduced him to music heavier and more brutal than anything he had heard before. Soon after, Chuck decided to form a band with 2 local high schoolers, and the garage was given up to the group's rehearsals. They called themselves Mantis, a pseudonym first adopted by Venom guitarist Jeffrey Dunn. Chuck's cohorts in this venture were guitarist Frederick D. Lillo, rechristened Rick Ross, and drummer/singer Barney Cam Lee. The band had no bassist. Chuck wrote most of the band's material and occasionally shared vocal duties with Lee. Shortly after forming, Mantis released a 5-track cassette called Death by Metal, recorded in Schuldina's garage. Its cover photo featured the 3 band members in front of a sign that reads "Danger, High Voltage." The band broke up in late 1984, but weeks later, the members reconvened with a new lead singer, Chuck, and a new name, Death. I always thought that the name of the band derived from the death of his brother, says Jane. And while the word has such painful memories, I did not object. Under Chuck's leadership, Death began to find its distinctive voice. As the writer and now singer of the group's lyrics, he turned the focus of Death's songs away from Lee's preferred devil imagery and toward gore. The group released the 5-song cassette Reign of Terror in October 1984 and the 3-track Infernal Death tape in March 1985. Both were circulated in the underground cassette trading market.